Evan Hale had never felt so small. The air inside the Xylar Dominion's palace shimmered with a strange, soft light that seemed to float in the air, making the walls glow in shades of gold and silver. He stepped cautiously, his boots making no sound on the polished floor. Around him, the hall stretched impossibly high, and towering crystal pillars reflected his own nervous expression. Everywhere he looked, there were guards, tall, strong, and silent. Their eyes, cold and precise, followed his every move. These were the elite protectors of the Xylar Queen, a being few humans had ever seen. Evan swallowed hard. He had trained for years to handle alien encounters, yet nothing had prepared him for the sheer presence of this palace. It was not just the size or the beauty, it was the feeling that everything in this place belonged to the Queen, and that even the smallest step could be noticed. At the center of the hall, sitting on a throne that looked like it had grown from the very crystal of the palace, was Queen Serelix. Her scales glimmered in soft silver light, each movement reflecting the colors of the floating crystals. Her eyes, large and serene, seemed to look into Evan's very soul. She radiated power, yet her posture was calm, almost thoughtful. The guards flanking her throne were statuesque. Their armor gleamed like black metal, edged with silver, and each held a weapon taller than Evan himself. Every movement they made was precise and controlled. Yet, despite their intimidating appearance, they did not speak. They were waiting, as if the air itself had paused. Evan straightened his back and cleared his throat. He had rehearsed this moment countless times. But reality was always different from imagination. "Your Majesty," he said, voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. "I am Evan Hale, a human explorer. I come in peace, seeking knowledge, understanding, and friendship between our species." The Queen's eyes shifted slightly, not with suspicion, but with quiet attention. Her voice when she spoke was soft, yet carried authority. "Why does a human enter our palace uninvited?" Evan swallowed and chose his words carefully. "I am not here to intrude. My journey brought me across many worlds, and I learned that your people, your empire, is respected across galaxies. I wanted to see it myself, to understand your culture and offer friendship." The hall was silent. The guards remained unmoving, their faces expressionless masks. The echo of Evan's voice lingered in the glowing room. He felt the weight of every stare, the weight of centuries of Xylar tradition pressing on him. Then, almost without thinking, Evan whispered under his breath, a little to himself, a little in awe. "She is beautiful." The words slipped from his mouth like a secret, meant for no one. But in the stillness of the hall, words do not hide easily. The moment his lips moved, a ripple of tension swept through the guards. Their weapons, which had been raised in silent alert, froze mid-motion. Queen Serelix's eyes narrowed just slightly, the kind of subtle movement that could only be noticed by someone truly paying attention. She rose from her throne with a grace that seemed effortless. The floor shimmered faintly under her feet as she moved forward, and Evan's heart thumped in his chest. "You said something," she said softly. And yet her voice carried across the hall like a gentle command. Evan's throat went dry. He tried to speak, to explain, but no sound came. The guards, normally unshakable, lowered their weapons slightly, uncertain. They had never seen the Queen respond to a human in this way. They had never seen her pause, even for a single second. I, Evan started, then paused. He looked directly at her eyes. There was something there, something different from the usual intimidating rulers he had read about in books. She was curious, not angry. I meant, you are beautiful, he said, louder this time, letting the words fill the vast hall. A pause. Silence. Then the Queen tilted her head, just enough to catch the light, and said the words that made the guards freeze completely. "Repeat it." Evan's heart almost stopped. Repeat it? He was sure this was a test, some ancient Xylar custom that could punish a human for daring to speak so freely. He swallowed, his throat tight, but he did not hesitate. "You are beautiful," he repeated, steady and true. The Queen's expression remained calm, but Evan could see something flicker in her silver eyes. Interest, maybe even admiration. The guards stiffened further, unsure if they should intervene or continue to obey her silent command. No one in the history of the Xylar Dominion had dared speak this way to the Queen and survived, or at least, survived without some serious reprimand. Queen Serelix stepped closer. Her movement was slow, deliberate, graceful. Evan noticed the soft sound of her scales brushing together, a gentle whisper that seemed almost musical in the silent hall. "You speak boldly, human," she said, her voice soft but powerful. "Few dare, and fewer still speak truthfully. Why do you say it?" Evan took a deep breath. He had prepared answers for diplomacy, for cultural misunderstanding, for fear and mistrust. But he had never prepared for honesty. "Because I see it," he said simply. "Not just the way you look, but the way you carry yourself, the way you lead, the strength and grace in every decision you make. It is beautiful." The Queen's eyes softened slightly, and the tension in the room eased just a little. For a moment, the human and the alien ruler stood in silence, two beings from different worlds, communicating not through threats or politics, but through honesty. Her voice broke the quiet once more. "Very well, human. You may stay in the palace as a guest. For now." The guards blinked, their usual certainty shaken. This was unprecedented. The Queen had spoken words that no one expected, and the human had survived, not because of luck, but because he had spoken truth. Evan bowed deeply, his legs trembling, but his heart raced with relief and excitement. "Thank you, Your Majesty," he said. "I will not forget this honor." Queen Serelix watched him for a long moment, then returned to her throne. "Tomorrow," she said softly, almost to herself, "we will begin to see what humans truly understand about the universe, and perhaps about beauty itself." The hall remained silent, the floating lights shimmering softly, reflecting the first moments of trust between two very different worlds. And somewhere deep in the palace, the guards whispered among themselves in disbelief. A human had called their queen beautiful, and she had not only heard it, but asked for it again. It was a moment that would be remembered forever, the beginning of a new story, one that would change the Xylar Dominion and the human world alike. The next morning, Evan awoke in a guest chamber unlike any room he had ever seen. The walls shimmered with soft, living light, changing color slowly like the sky at dawn. The bed was wide and soft, floating slightly above the floor. Though luxurious, the room was quiet and calm, as if it had been created to encourage thought and reflection rather than mere comfort. Evan had expected to be questioned or even confined, but nothing of the sort happened. The Queen's decision to allow him to stay puzzled the palace guards and advisors alike. Whispers spread through the halls. Why would the Queen let a human speak so boldly? By mid-morning, a soft knock came at his door. A voice, gentle but firm, spoke. "Evan Hale, the Queen wishes to see you." He rose quickly, brushing himself off, and followed the voice through the maze-like corridors. Every step he took was watched by silent guards, though they did not interfere. Somehow he felt more curiosity than fear from them now. Perhaps they were as confused as he was about the Queen's unusual decision. When he entered the throne room, Queen Serelix was already waiting. She was seated, her long silver-scaled tail coiled neatly around her. Her eyes, bright and intelligent, watched him carefully. "Come closer, human," she said. "I wish to understand you, and your words." Evan bowed respectfully, then stepped forward. The room felt alive with quiet energy. "Your Majesty, I am honored to meet you again," he said. Serelix's gaze softened just slightly. "Tell me, human, why do your people speak words of admiration? Why do you call things beautiful that are not meant for you to possess or control?" Evan paused. This was a question that humans often overlooked, but he had thought about it many times. "Because," he began carefully, "we recognize strength, grace, and courage. We celebrate it with words because it encourages good in the world. We honor it not to claim it, but to show respect." The Queen tilted her head, considering his answer. "And you? You speak words freely, even in the presence of danger?" Evan nodded. "I have learned that honesty is more powerful than fear. It may not protect me from harm, but it gives me clarity and trust. And sometimes, it even changes hearts." The Queen leaned back slightly, studying him. "Perhaps humans are not entirely foolish," she said softly. The words sounded almost like a whisper to herself, yet Evan felt the weight of them. She continued, her voice firmer. "You will remain here, and you will teach me of your ways. I will teach you of ours." This was the first time anyone in the Dominion had spoken openly about teaching the Queen anything. Even the advisors seemed uneasy, glancing nervously at each other. The guards, tall and unyielding, shifted uneasily, as if unsure whether they should protest or stay silent. Over the next days, Evan and Serelix spent hours together in the palace gardens. These gardens floated above the city with glowing plants and trees that shifted colors like liquid light. Strange creatures, small and friendly, wandered the paths, and the air smelled sweet and fresh. The Queen walked beside him, asking questions about human culture, music, art, and friendship. Evan explained how humans celebrated life, honored achievements, and expressed care for one another. He spoke of words that lifted spirits, actions that showed kindness, and the simple courage it took to admit feelings honestly. The Queen listened with a patience and curiosity that made him realize she had never truly encountered honesty like this before. "Do humans always speak so freely?" she asked one afternoon, her silver eyes reflecting the floating lights around them. "Not always," Evan admitted. "Sometimes we fear judgment or danger, but when we speak the truth, it is a bridge to understanding." Serelix remained quiet for a long moment. Then she said, almost to herself, "Perhaps my people have forgotten the power of such bridges." Evan noticed her gaze linger on the floating crystals, the soft reflections of light in her scales, and the faint smile that touched her lips. It was the first time he had seen a hint of gentleness in her usual composed expression. He realized that his simple words, spoken honestly, had begun to open something new in her: curiosity, trust, and maybe even admiration. One evening, the Queen brought him to the Hall of Records, a vast room filled with glowing scrolls and holographic maps. She wanted to understand human history, how they overcame challenges, and how they treated one another in times of conflict. Evan explained the lessons humans learned from mistakes, from wars, and from moments of bravery. "Humans are fragile," Serelix said thoughtfully. "Yet you endure and sometimes rise stronger than those who seem greater than you. You do not rely on force alone, but on ingenuity, courage, and heart." Evan smiled. "We try. We know our lives are short compared to stars and empires. So we honor what we can, and we help those we can. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But we never stop trying." The Queen's eyes softened, a rare warmth shining through. "You speak of hope and truth as if they were weapons," she said, "and yet they seem to accomplish more than the largest armies." It was then that Evan realized why the guards had frozen the first day he spoke. The queen was not angry. She was intrigued, and intrigue, in the Dominion, was a force no one could ignore. As days passed, the palace staff began to notice small changes in Serelix. She spoke differently to her advisors, asking questions instead of giving commands. She walked with her head held high, but her gestures were less rigid, more thoughtful. The guards remained alert but relaxed slightly around Evan, no longer just protective, but curious about this human who had dared speak a single word of honesty and change the queen's behavior. One afternoon, while walking through the gardens, Serelix stopped beside a crystal fountain. Water glowed faintly as it arced through the air, reflecting light across her scales. "Evan," she said, "your words are unusual. They are not flattery, not lies, not games. You speak simply, yet I feel their weight." Evan looked at her, unsure what to say. "I speak what I feel, Your Majesty. I cannot offer anything else." A faint smile touched her lips. "Then perhaps this is what I needed to hear, to be reminded that even power and duty do not replace truth and understanding." Evan realized that this moment was far greater than he had expected. A single human voice, spoken honestly, had begun to shift the thinking of a ruler whose decisions could affect countless lives. It was not weapons, not strategy, not politics. It was honesty and courage. As the sun set in the floating gardens, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet, Evan knew that his journey was just beginning. He had entered the Xylar Dominion as a visitor, perhaps even a curiosity. But now, he had the chance to build something far greater: trust, understanding, and a bridge between two worlds that had never truly known one another. And somewhere deep in the palace, the guards whispered among themselves, still astonished. The human had spoken words that would change more than a single queen. They would change the Dominion itself, one honest moment at a time. Days turned into a week, and Evan Hale's presence in the Xylar Palace became a quiet sensation. The palace halls, once rigid with formality, seemed subtly altered by his honesty. Queen Serelix had grown accustomed to his steady presence, often inviting him to walk with her among the floating gardens or to the palace's highest towers, where the city below stretched like a silver river under glowing skies. Evan had learned quickly that the Xylar Dominion was a civilization of logic, discipline, and rigid order. The citizens were proud, the architecture grand, and the guards vigilant. Yet emotional expression was rare. Words like friendship and kindness were seldom used openly. In this environment, Evan's open honesty and human warmth were both strange and fascinating. One morning, as soft light poured through the crystal windows, Serelix led Evan to a balcony overlooking the city. "Tell me," she said, her silver eyes reflecting the sun, "why do humans smile at strangers? Why do you speak so freely even when there is no reward?" Evan leaned on the railing, gazing at the bustling city below. "Smiles are a way to show trust, to show that you mean no harm. And words? We speak freely because honesty creates connections. We learn to understand one another, even if we are very different." The queen remained silent for a moment, absorbing his words. "Your people seem fragile in many ways," she said thoughtfully. "Yet I see strength in what you call fragility. You survive not because of power alone, but because of courage, hope, and understanding." Evan smiled. "That is what we call resilience. We make mistakes. We fail, but we keep moving forward. And we help one another when we can. That is what makes us strong." Serelix considered him for a long moment. "I wonder," she said softly, almost to herself, "if my people have lost sight of such strength." Evan realized then that the queen was beginning to question not just human ways, but her own empire. She had been a ruler for decades, but she had never seen the power of honesty and emotional courage in action until now. The simple act of speaking truth, as he had done when he first called her beautiful, had opened a door in her mind that no weapon or law could have. Later that day, Evan was invited into the Hall of Archives, a vast chamber where floating scrolls and holographic images recorded the history of the Xylar Dominion. The queen walked silently beside him, her long tail coiling gracefully on the floor. "I wish to understand how your people live," she said. "Teach me your history. Teach me why honesty and emotion hold such power." Evan carefully explained human history, starting with stories of exploration, discovery, and courage. He told her of moments when humans had faced overwhelming odds, yet continued to try, simply because they believed it was the right thing to do. He spoke of friendship, sacrifice, and moments of kindness that changed lives. The queen listened intently, asking questions with an interest that surprised the palace staff. "You speak of hope and courage as if they are tools," she said, "yet they seem more powerful than armies or fleets." "Sometimes they are," Evan admitted. "Power without understanding can destroy, but courage and trust create bonds that survive generations." Serelix was silent for a while, and then she asked, "Do humans always fight for what is right?" Evan shook his head. "No. We make mistakes, but when we recognize them, we try to correct them. That is how we grow. Strength comes not from never failing, but from learning to rise after failure." The queen's expression softened, her usual formality giving way to curiosity and reflection. She began to see a side of leadership that she had long ignored, the power of listening, understanding, and guiding with wisdom rather than fear. As the days passed, Evan and Serelix spent more time together, exploring the palace gardens, walking along the crystal corridors, and speaking under the stars. They shared stories of their worlds, their hopes, and their fears. Though from very different species, a bond formed between them, built not on politics or diplomacy, but on honesty and mutual respect. The palace guards watched silently, puzzled yet attentive. They had never seen their queen speak to another being in such a manner. They could sense the subtle change in her demeanor. Her movements were calmer, her decisions less rigid, her gaze thoughtful rather than commanding. Their loyalty remained steadfast, but curiosity and caution mingled with their vigilance. One evening, as they walked through a floating garden illuminated by bioluminescent plants, Serelix paused by a fountain. The water shimmered like liquid silver, reflecting both of their faces. "Evan," she said softly, "you are different from others I have met. You speak freely, you act without fear, and yet you show respect. Why does your kind have such courage?" Evan thought for a moment. "Perhaps because we know that life is short, and moments are fleeting. If we hide our words or our feelings, we miss the chance to make a difference. Courage does not come from strength alone, but from honesty and the willingness to act despite fear." The queen considered this carefully. "Your words. They make sense, yet they are unusual for this empire. Perhaps your kind possesses a wisdom my people have forgotten." Evan smiled, sensing the rare warmth behind her silver gaze. Sometimes it takes someone from the outside to remind others of what they already have. At that moment, a distant echo of concern reached the palace. A council advisor had noticed subtle changes in the queen's behavior and whispered to other leaders. Some were uneasy, fearing that the human's influence might destabilize the rigid traditions of the Dominion. The guards, however, remained loyal, though even they could not ignore the quiet effect Evan's presence had on the queen. Despite the tension, Serelix continued to meet with Evan, often asking questions that even her advisors could not answer. She was fascinated by human emotions, the power of words and the concept of friendship and trust as forces stronger than fear or intimidation. One day she led Evan to the palace library, a vast chamber filled with records of the Dominion's victories, discoveries, and rulers' decisions. "Humans speak of ethics and choices," she said. "I wish to understand. How do you choose what is right?" Evan explained that right and wrong were not always simple. "We think about consequences, about how others will be affected. We discuss, we listen, we adjust. It is not perfect, but it creates understanding. Even mistakes teach us lessons." The Queen nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps my people have relied too heavily on order and strength. Perhaps understanding and honesty are equally powerful, even if rare." As they walked back through the gardens, Evan realized the weight of what was happening. A single human, speaking honestly and courageously, had begun to change the thinking of a ruler whose decisions shaped millions of lives. He understood now that his words, simple as they were, had created a bridge between their worlds, one that could alter the course of history if nurtured wisely. Serelix paused beneath a glowing tree, its branches shimmering like liquid silver. "Evan," she said softly, "I did not expect to find a human who could teach me so much. Yet your presence, it opens my mind. I wish to continue learning from you." "If you are willing." Evan felt a sense of honor and responsibility. "I am willing, Your Majesty. I wish to learn from you as well. Your people, your culture, your wisdom, they are remarkable. I hope we can understand each other fully." The Queen's eyes softened, a rare and precious expression for one so powerful. "Then we shall see how far understanding can reach. Perhaps the first steps of a new era begin not with conquest but with words." And so, in the floating gardens of the Xylar Dominion, a human and an alien queen began a journey of learning and trust, their bond growing stronger with each shared moment. Little did they know, challenges were already stirring beyond the palace walls, forces that would soon test not only their courage, but the very lessons they were beginning to teach one another. The sun had just risen over the floating city of the Xylar Dominion when the first alarm sounded. Soft, rhythmic chimes echoed through the crystal halls, but there was no panic, at least not yet. Queen Serelix's eyes narrowed as she stood from her throne, immediately alert. Evan Hale, who had grown accustomed to her presence, felt a surge of tension he had never experienced before. "What is it?" he asked, noticing the quick, silent movement of the guards. Serelix's voice was calm but carried authority. "A faction beyond our borders has moved against us. They oppose peace and seek to claim our territory. They will not wait for negotiations." Evan's heart raced, but he forced himself to remain steady. "Can humans help?" he asked cautiously. The Queen turned to him, her silver eyes thoughtful. "Perhaps. You understand strategy differently, and your perspective may be valuable. But this is no simple threat. Our attackers are skilled, organized, and powerful." Within the hour, the Palace Council convened in the Grand Strategy Chamber. Holographic maps floated above a crystal table, showing the movements of alien fleets approaching the borders. Advisors spoke rapidly, offering solutions rooted in tradition, immediate retaliation, overwhelming force, or strict defense. But Serelix remained silent, considering the options with a new clarity inspired by Evan's teachings. She finally spoke. "We will defend our people, yes, but we will not act recklessly. We will protect life and seek a solution that minimizes unnecessary harm. Evan, your human perspective, what would you do?" Evan stepped forward, trying to remain calm despite the weight of the moment. "If I were defending a city, I would focus on protecting the civilians first. Use technology and strategy to slow the enemy, not to destroy indiscriminately. And I would communicate when possible to avoid misunderstandings. Strength is important, but so is intelligence and care. The Queen's eyes flickered with interest. A human's approach, cautious yet clever. Perhaps it will work. Plans were set quickly. The Queen's fleet would hold the outer defenses while select teams, including human advisors, organized protective measures for the citizens. Evan found himself working alongside the guards, guiding them in the use of human technology adapted to Xylar systems. The alien warriors, initially skeptical of a human instructing them, soon saw the wisdom in his approach. His ideas combined speed, strategy, and precision, minimizing risk to civilians while preparing the city for the approaching threat. As night fell, the enemy arrived. The sky outside the floating palace shimmered with approaching ships, their lights harsh and threatening. The first volleys of energy pulses lit the horizon. The city's defense systems responded, forming glowing barriers of protection. The Queen watched from the balcony, calm but focused, giving orders with exact precision. Evan stayed at her side, offering advice where he could. When an enemy ship attempted to bypass the outer barriers, Evan suggested a clever maneuver, using smaller human-designed drones to intercept it. The Queen nodded, giving silent approval, and the plan worked perfectly. "Your ideas are effective," she said softly, her voice carrying just above the wind. "I see why truth and honesty in thought are as valuable as strength in battle." Hours passed, and the battle raged on, but the Dominion's defenses held strong. The Queen's forces moved with renewed purpose, their coordination improved by the new strategies Evan had introduced. The guards who had once frozen at the sound of Evan's words now fought beside him, respectful and trusting. During a tense moment, one of the enemy ships targeted a squad of Queen's guards. Without hesitation, Evan jumped into action, redirecting the ship's attack using a combination of human and Xylar technology. The guards were stunned. Never had a human risked himself so openly to protect them. Serelix watched quietly, her chest swelling with admiration for his courage. After several hours, the enemy began to retreat. Their forces were disorganized, confused by the unexpected tactics of the Dominion. Serelix allowed them to withdraw rather than pursuing total destruction. Her advisors were shocked. They expected vengeance, not mercy, but she understood that this was the moment to demonstrate a new type of leadership, strong, decisive, and compassionate. The city was safe. Citizens emerged from shelters, blinking at the starlight, grateful yet unaware of how close they had come to disaster. Guards reported to the Queen, acknowledging the bravery of both her forces and the human advisor who had guided them. Later, in the quiet of the palace gardens, Serelix and Evan walked side by side, observing the city below. The floating lights of the city sparkled like stars fallen to the ground. "You acted with courage," she said quietly, "not because you were required, but because you believed it was right. That is remarkable." Evan shook his head. "I just did what anyone who values life would do. I couldn't stand by while people were in danger. I'm glad I could help." The Queen's eyes softened, a rare warmth reflecting in their silver depths. "Your kind, humans, show strength in ways we rarely see, not just in weapons, not just in fleets, but in courage, thought, and honesty. You have reminded me of something important, something even my empire may have forgotten." Evan looked at her, understanding that the words were not flattery, but truth. "You've shown me strength too, Your Majesty. Leadership isn't just command. It's protection, understanding, and the courage to choose wisely." For the first time, the guards spoke freely among themselves, expressing quiet admiration for both the human and the Queen. They had seen a visitor from another world not only survive among them, but influence their ruler in a way that saved countless lives. They began to understand that courage and intelligence, combined with honesty and empathy, could surpass even the mightiest of weapons. That night, The palace was calm. The battle had ended, but the lessons remained. Serelix returned to her throne, thoughtful, yet resolute. She knew that the Dominion could not simply rely on force alone. There were new ideas to consider, new ways to lead, and a human beside her who had shown that even small beings could make monumental differences. Evan, standing quietly in the shadow of the throne, felt a sense of accomplishment, but also humility. He had come seeking understanding, and he had given it in return. In doing so, he had earned trust, respect, and something far greater. A chance to build bridges between worlds that had never truly connected before. As he looked at the Queen, she spoke softly, almost to herself, yet he heard every word. Perhaps this is the start of a new path, not just for humans, but for the Xylar Dominion itself. The night settled over the floating city, peaceful yet alive with possibility. And in that quiet moment, Evan realized that true courage and understanding, qualities so common to humans, yet so rare among rulers, had the power to change empires and perhaps even the course of history. The battle had passed, and the floating city of the Xylar Dominion returned to its quiet grandeur. The streets shimmered in soft light, reflecting the crystal towers and glowing gardens. Citizens moved cautiously at first, still feeling the tension of recent events, but a sense of relief and hope began to settle over the city. Evan Hale walked alongside Queen Serelix through the palace corridors. The silence between them was not awkward. It was filled with understanding. The lessons of the past days weighed on both of them, shaping thoughts and decisions for the future. Evan noticed how different the palace felt now. The rigid formality of before had softened slightly, influenced by their shared experiences and conversations. The Queen led him to the council chamber, where advisors gathered to discuss the aftermath of the attack. The room was filled with careful whispers, but Seralix's presence brought immediate attention and respect. She raised her voice calmly. "Our people are safe," she said, her silver eyes scanning the room. "We have weathered a test, not by sheer force alone, but through strategy, courage, and honesty. We have learned that strength must be guided by understanding," the council murmured among themselves. Some were wary, questioning the influence of a human on their queen. Others, however, recognized the wisdom in her words. They had seen the results: a city defended, lives preserved, and an enemy repelled with minimal loss. Serelix continued, "This human, Evan Hale, has reminded me of qualities my people have forgotten. Courage that does not seek glory, words that build trust, and choices made with care for life. If we are to continue as a strong empire, we must embrace these lessons, not fear them." Evan felt the weight of her words, but also pride, not for himself, but for the opportunity to show the Xylar Dominion that even one small voice, spoken honestly, could create meaningful change. After the council meeting, Seralix invited Evan to walk in the floating gardens. The air was warm, filled with the scent of glowing flowers and the soft hum of the city below. "You have done more than I could have imagined," she said quietly. "Not with force, not with diplomacy, but simply with truth and courage. You have opened my mind, and perhaps the hearts of others as well." Evan smiled. "I only spoke what I believed. You did the rest, Your Majesty. You led with strength, with care, and with trust. That is why it worked." The Queen's gaze softened, and for a moment her usual composure gave way to something gentler, almost human. "Humans speak freely and yet so wisely," she said. "Perhaps I underestimated your kind. Perhaps we have much to learn from each other." Evan looked out over the city, watching citizens begin to return to their routines. "I believe every species has wisdom to share," he said. "We only need to listen and act with honesty." Serelix nodded thoughtfully. Then perhaps this is the beginning of a new chapter, not just for humans or Xylars, but for both our worlds, one built on trust, respect, and understanding. Over the following weeks, the changes in the Dominion became more evident. Guards who once acted with strict formality now allowed small gestures of kindness. Advisors considered alternative perspectives in decision-making. Citizens noticed a subtle shift in how the Queen interacted with them, her leadership now blending strength with empathy. Evan continued to work alongside the Queen, offering insight into human methods of problem-solving, diplomacy, and culture. He taught them about compromise, negotiation, and the power of honest words. In return, Seralik shared knowledge of the Dominion's technology, governance, and history. Together, they built a bridge of understanding between two very different worlds. One evening, under the glow of the floating gardens, Seralik paused and looked at Evan. "Do humans always speak as freely as you do?" she asked. "Not always," Evan replied. "Some are afraid, but I believe that honesty, when paired with courage, is a strength greater than fear." She studied him silently, then smiled softly. "Then I am glad I asked you to repeat your words the first day. Because of that, I have learned something valuable, not only about humans, but about leadership, trust, and courage." Evan felt a warmth spread through him. He realized that the simple act of speaking truth had not only earned respect, but had changed the way a great empire would think, lead, and act for years to come. In the palace, the guards whispered among themselves about the human who had influenced their queen. They still stood vigilant, yet there was a quiet admiration in their expressions. For the first time, they saw that courage and wisdom could come in forms they had not expected. Even the advisors, who had once doubted the human's influence, now acknowledged that his perspective had saved lives and reshaped their empire's leadership. As days passed, the Queen summoned representatives from human worlds. She spoke of alliance, understanding, and the lessons learned from courage and honesty. Evan watched proudly as the two worlds began to communicate in a way that promised cooperation rather than conflict. One quiet night, Evan and Seralik returned to the balcony overlooking the city. The stars reflected in the floating waterways, painting the sky with colors neither could name. "I never imagined," Seralik said softly, "that a human could teach me so much simply by being honest and courageous." Evan shook his head. "You taught me too, Your Majesty. You taught me that strength is not only in power or skill, but in compassion, leadership, and the courage to act wisely. We both learned something valuable from each other." The Queen's gaze lingered on the horizon. "Perhaps this is the way forward, not with conquest, but with understanding, not with fear, but with trust, a new path for both our worlds." Evan nodded. "And we start it together." They stood in silence, watching as the city shimmered under the soft glow of the moon. The floating gardens reflected their shared journey, a reminder that courage, honesty, and understanding could change even the most rigid of empires. For the first time, the Xylar Dominion looked to the future with hope, not just in its technology or power, but in the hearts of its leaders and citizens. And in that future, humans and Xylars would walk together, building bridges, learning from each other, and shaping a world where strength and compassion were equal partners. Seralik turned to Evan, her expression soft and thoughtful. "You spoke one simple word, and it changed everything." Evan smiled. "Not just one word, Your Majesty. Every choice, every act of honesty, every moment of courage. That's what changes everything." She nodded, her silver eyes reflecting trust and understanding. "Then let us continue, together as teachers and learners, as leaders and friends. Perhaps the story of our worlds has only just begun." And so the human and the alien queen stood together, looking out over a city that had been tested and had endured. They had faced danger, learned from each other, and forged a bond that would not only unite two species, but create a legacy of courage, wisdom, and understanding for generations to come. The stars above shimmered with promise, and for the first time, the Xylar Dominion and humanity could look forward to a future built not on fear, but on truth, respect, and the extraordinary power of a single honest moment.